Welcome back to Morning Live. Now, after years of serving as Cosatu Western Cape's General Secretary, Tony Ehrenreich decided to bow out and allowing last week's Congress to elect a new leader. With his track record and his understanding of politics, the ANC in the region now wants him to join the legislature. But known for his frank approach to socio-economic issues, Tony says he will only go if the salaries of parliamentarians have been reduced by half of what they are currently at the moment. And Tony Ehrenreich joins us now from our Cape Town studios. Tony, good morning and thanks so much for joining us here on Morning Live.
Good morning, thank you.
It's been more than 3 decades that you've been at it, busy with the union movements. What does it feel like to be technically retired at this point?
Well, I miss it every day because the unions have been part of my life for 30 years in some shape or form. So it's something that's just become such a part of me. So of course I miss it, and I miss the interaction with workers, the amazing sense of solidarity and camaraderie. So it's going to be a great absence in my life for a long time. But I hope to continue in the unions in a different position sometime in the future.
And there's a lot of talk about unions, the union federations in the country, their usefulness at this point, what it is that they can do for workers. As someone who's been there at the coalface for over 3 decades, what would you say? You know, is there still a future for our unions in this country? Are they on the right path? Or, you know, do you think that there needs to be a change here?
Absolutely, there's a need for unions in the future. If you just look at how more tenuous the job security of workers have become through labor broking and outsourcing and different kinds of work. Workers need unions, and unions need workers to fight and ensure that we protect their rights. The issue, of course, is that we've got to make sure that we unite all workers in the country, that the unions serve the members, that the social distance between the union leadership and the members are closed, and that we become the kind of organization that's founded on solidarity that we were in the fight against apartheid. Because the challenges are no less severe today. It's a new environment. Democracy's brought many opportunities, but it's also brought challenges. And we as a labor movement have got to respond to these things in a modern industrial democracy. It is a reality of life and all global developments that the most industrialized economies are those who are most unionized, because unions play an important role in ensuring that there's an expression of the interest of workers in the workplace and in society. And we've got to ensure that we strengthen that position in South Africa so that we can ensure that the process of change, the transformation in our country, benefits the majority of the people in our country.
Tony, Cosatu, the trade union federation that you've been involved with these 3 decades, and their alliance with the African National Congress. Now, many have accused Cosatu of basically shedding their mandate in order to be cozy with the ANC for positions, etc., etc. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think that it is still in the benefit and to the benefit of workers for Cosatu to be in that alliance with the ANC, or has that run its course?
I think a trade union federation, and especially one as powerful as Cosatu, will always be in a relationship with the governing party. We've been and established a relationship in the fight against apartheid, so the track record is clear. We've achieved a lot as the ANC and Cosatu in our alliance. Just recently, the minimum wage being promulgated, which in part is a direct result of the relationship between Cosatu and the ANC. And that's meant that more than 6 million workers have had their income levels rise. Not a great increase to 3,500 rand, but way above what they have at the moment. So it certainly seems that there's some value in it. The big question we must ask ourselves, does that value exceed the importance of workers being unified if the political alliance is separating workers? And that's an important question. The question of unity of all workers in the country, in all their different formations, is probably as important as the collaboration with the governing party. We've got a lot to do in this country, but the most important thing is to make sure we focus on the needs of workers. Even the process of transformation in our country has been challenged. How can Baleka Mabeta get a BE stake that's equivalent to 25 million rand in gold fields when the workers don't get an equal stake in respect of the wealth that they've created? Those are the challenges that the union movement must take up to make sure that we undo the huge inequalities in our society, that we don't just replace a white elite with a black elite, but that we build the kind of society that's more equal, more fair, and that provides prosperity to all of our people. The unions have got to play a central role in making sure that that agenda encapsulated in the Freedom Charter is realized in South Africa.
But some would argue that it is not currently. Even if you just look at the union leadership, if you look at the salaries that they actually command, if you look at their conspicuous lifestyles that they live, it's in stark contrast with the workers that they lead.
Absolutely. That's one of the big fault lines in South Africa, that the social distance between the leadership and the members of a variety of organizations does not reflect what should be the value system of South Africa. And that social distance is as prevalent in the union movement. So we've got to reduce the salaries of union officials to be more in line with the members of the union movement and to make sure that we connected more directly. But by the same token, we should reduce the salaries and perks of the parliamentarians. The same token, we should reduce the salaries and perks of the CEOs and the managers in companies. We've got to remove that apartheid wage gap that was a feature of apartheid and that we said would be done away with in a democratic South Africa. We can't just give people the vote every 5 years. We've got to make sure that we uplift people's lives. This country has enough wealth for all of its people, but the wealth must be shared more equally because then everybody is able to prosper. There's not a white and a black South Africa anymore. There's one South Africa, and so all South Africans must prosper out of the incredible wealth and possibilities in our country. And that should not be out of an act of charity. That should be because it's an absolute requirement for stability and for the future prospects of our country in everybody's interest.
Well, some would say theoretically yes, but it's pie in the sky stuff because who's actually willing to give up the salaries, the perks that they currently earn? And you said that you would be willing to go to Parliament provided that the salaries of parliamentarians are halved. But how do you actually affect that? Would you be able to table such a motion? Would you be willing to?
I'd certainly be willing to do that. I certainly, if I were to go anywhere to represent people, and there's no guarantees that I'm going to be going anywhere for the ANC or Cosatu, but if I were to, I would not want to take the exorbitant and extravagant salaries and perks that are in Parliament at the moment. And I'd want to have a discussion about closing the social distance between the parliamentarians and our people so that there's more credibility, there's more legitimacy, and we undo the trust deficit that exists in our countries. It was a huge mistake to just adopt what was the apartheid salaries for parliamentarians when 1994 came. We had to make sure it's in line with our values, and to make sure it's in line with what we promised our people in the Liberation Pledge to our people. And I certainly think that that's an important question that's got to be revived and that we've got to take forward. The first things that many councillors and many parliamentarians do is to move out of the areas that they've been living in for decades. And that's wrong because we're becoming distant from our people. But by the same token, I want to say that there are some greedy parliamentarians, but there are wonderful parliamentarians focused on building a better life, making sure that every day of their efforts is directed at the people. And so it's not to undermine their incredible efforts. We have the prospect now under the new presidency to address the challenges that confronts us. The disaster of Zuma is behind us, but besides just doing the right thing now, we must be seen to be doing the right thing. And we must do that in a way that reconnects us with our people, because there's a lot of work to be done to undo apartheid and create the better life for all of our people.
And then, Tony, how do you actually close that distance between the bosses, the leaders, political and otherwise, and the people that they lead, the people on the ground? Because these days, people think of becoming a parliamentarian as some ways of amassing wealth as opposed to serving the people. How do you then go about getting back to basics?
We can get back to basics if our people hold us to account. Our people mustn't just elect the people and lead them. Don't give leaders a blank check. Ever hold them to account. Make sure that they don't only talk the good talk, but that they actually live the values that the organization espouses. Because if you're in an organization, you're there to represent the ambitions of the members of that organization. So we should hold them to account. But by the same token, we've got to make sure that it's not only just greed that drives us. There's got to be enlightened self-interest that makes us understand that it's important for us to raise the aggregate levels of income of all of the people in the society, because that is the best way in which we can grow the economy, by generating demand, by having more consumers, and that will create more opportunities, that will create more jobs, and that will take our country forward. So that's not only in the question of charity, that's about doing what's best for our country over the long term. And that's what we've got to reinstill. We mustn't follow those who want to make the short-term buck over the shortest term, but they're leading our country down the cliff. We've got to take a longer-term view. We've all got to make a contribution, and we mustn't let greed ever define what is the value system that our country should be taking forward in its actions and our leaders should be perpetuating.
Looking at some of the topical issues right now, SASSA, for example, which is top of mind this morning because people are struggling to access their social grants. And just to further exacerbate that situation, you have union members who are on strike. And yet again, it is the poorest of the poor who bear the brunt of this action. What is your take on that?
There's an important discussion that must be held there, because clearly we should never compromise the well-being and the livelihoods of the poorest of our people. Our country has done an incredible achievement by making sure that nearly 17 million people have grants from the government coffers. But we've got to make sure that those are applied effectively. Part of the effective implementation of that is to make sure the workers are also treated decently. But while we as the union struggle against the conditions of employment, we must be cautious that it does not undermine the very people that we want to serve. So in this instance, the unions must commit to making sure that they urgently work with government to make sure people get their grants and that the labor-related issues that are in dispute are resolved as a matter of urgency. But often it's the leaders in those institutions that don't respond to the challenges urgently enough that leads to disputes and industrial action following. And so we've got to manage our industrial relations environment a lot more carefully so that it doesn't have the unintended consequences we've seen for many of the SASSA beneficiaries today.
And then the other topical issue is, of course, the question of land and the review of Section 25 of the Constitution, land expropriation without compensation. Now, here again, like with so many other tangible issues that one would think government has left too late in the day to deal with. What's your take on that, where we find ourselves at currently?
It is sad that 24 years into our democracy, we're only now tackling land in a real way. Land is the essential fault line of apartheid. The people were dispossessed. Apartheid was the grand theft that took away the land of people, and that has to be undone. And what we've got to do is work together to address that. And it gets us back to the point about the sense of a division of a white South Africa and a black South Africa. Those who benefited under apartheid can't insist on holding on to their ill-gotten gain. We've got to build partnerships, even if it's 50-50 partnerships that sees a new environment on the farms and in the agricultural sectors. But many of the farmers don't want to enter into a new dispensation. The government's now got to act decisively, because the question about land transformation is about empowering people and addressing poverty of our people. So we've got to deal with that. And those who don't want to cooperate to ensure that we bring about more equity, we've got to deal with making sure that we not compensate the land when we expropriate it if there's not cooperation. But there's a lot of space for us to find synergy and to find agreement. If we have a common sense of our future being tied together, then we can find the solutions. But if we don't, then we're going to have to take harsh steps. But the government can't now delay the question of dealing with land any more than it has for the last 24 years. We've got to deal with it urgently, and we've got to deal with it decisively, and we hopefully have got to find a mixture that takes everybody's interest into account.
What, to your mind, would decisive action look like?
There's been great examples of land transformation in South Africa. Solms Delta is a great example where the farmers and the workers came together. They formed a trust. They now have 50-50 ownership. The farm flourished for a long time and was able to get a lot more export opportunities. There's been some difficulties now, like in any other sector of the economy or any other sector of the agricultural arena. But it's amazing to see how many farmers are now condemning the Solms Delta example. Those who condemn it are not saying that this is a great example that we must follow, but they're nearly relishing the fact that there's difficulties in that because they don't want to see a more equitable model being the basis for taking forward the interest of black and white people as one in South Africa. And that's the Rubicon that's got to be crossed by many white conservative farmers. They've got to understand that our interest in the future is tied together. We've got to deal with land reform. We've got to expropriate without compensation if they don't want to cooperate. But ideally, we can find a solution. But that means there's got to be a huge jump from where people find themselves now to one of partnerships, to one of a common future, and to one where the legacy of apartheid in the rural and agricultural areas are undone once and for all, and the sons of the farm workers have the same prospects as the sons of the farmers.
Tony, and after 30 years of serving South Africa through the trade union movements, what are you going to do next? You've always been one who doesn't hold his tongue when it comes to especially socio-economic injustice. So what are you going to tackle next?
Well, I hope to continue serving workers in some shape or form. So I'll be applying for a job in one of the unions and hope to continue working with workers to improve the circumstances of workers, but to take our country towards a much more equitable outcome that confronts the greed and the corruption that's been a feature of apartheid and unfortunately a feature of democracy. We've got to build the society we promised our people. Under the new presidency, there's lots of excitements and lots of possibilities. I want to make a contribution to that effort and to make sure that we finally realize the dream of what is possible in South Africa when we all work together as black and white and all of the organizations not divided by our political baggage and our differences of opinion on tactics and strategy.
Well, Tony Ehrenreich, thanks so much for coming through this morning and speaking to us. And that was, of course, former Cosatu General Secretary in the Western Cape, Tony Ehrenreich, talking to us about what he intends to do as he steps down from Cosatu, his views on politics, and, of course, the country's socio-economic issues. And the one thing about Tony is that he does actually walk the talk. He did have two salaries, one in the Western Cape legislature and Cosatu, and the one salary he used to actually prop up the salary of one of the administrators and also give towards charitable causes because he felt it was too much for one person to enjoy those two salaries. So what do you think from what he said? Do our elected representatives actually earn too much? At Morning Live SABC, love to hear your views.